He's editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a New York Times best-selling author. And on this podcast, he brings deep research, prescient analysis, and world-class guests. He's Alex Marlow, and this is The Alex Marlow Show.
All right, welcome to The Marlow Show. I got to tell you, I had 5 interviews this morning. Some of them were with shows you like. I was on Laura Trump's show, The Right View, that comes out, I think, this evening. I was on Charlie Kirk's podcast, and I did my Breitbart Confidential show where I went to the Big Beautiful Bill with Bradley J. And I decided, you know what, I want to keep it rolling with my Breitbart fam. And Oliver Lane will be here later, our London bureau chief. And in a moment, we're going to go to John Binder, who's one of the best reporters on immigration in the world. And someone I rely on quite a bit when I'm trying to get caught up on stuff. I will tell you, it's going to be a huge week for the Big Beautiful Bill. I've got a pile of updates for you. I don't think things are going to move super fast, so I'm going to tell you tomorrow will be a heavy Big Beautiful Bill show. I'm going to talk to the White House on the show. Tomorrow we'll get some representative from the White House come in, chime in on where they're at. And we'll have Senator Mark Wayne Mullen on coming up. We'll have Senator Hawley on coming up. So we are watching the bill progress in the Senate as Congress got back last night as we're recording this. Trump and Rand Paul are going back and forth this morning. Paul does not want to raise the debt ceiling. He's never voted for a debt ceiling increase. I think he's going to do so here, but he's going to demand a lot in return. So it's a matter of whether or not Trump is going to be able to get there. So all those details for you throughout the week. We're looking at a week's time frame here, not days, but also not months. Thune's target is to get this done by July 4th. So we'll have a lot more updates for you. Other stuff I'm hot on. I touched on this briefly yesterday, but a lot of the pride stuff, how some entities, organizations, industries are pulling back. We did a hugely viral story at Breitbart, how Target, which was at the forefront, Target, the retail brand, the Walmart competitor, whatever you want to call it, they were really leaning into all the pride stuff. That has gone away, but then a lot of pro sports are leaning into it for some reason. Most of the NFL teams, a lot of the Major League Baseball teams. But to me, the one that really is an outrage is Sesame Street, because they target preschoolers. And to have a government-funded TV show for preschoolers doing not just gay stuff, but trans stuff, it is too much. We're not talking about consenting adults. We are talking about infiltrating people's homes. And I cannot get down with that, especially when it's taxpayer funded. I talked about that a little bit on yesterday's show, but that really is advancing. A lot of Republicans are now demanding PBS get defunded. I have no idea why we fund PBS, but as we see a lot of progress when it comes to these woke issues in the post-November 5th era, some entities where I don't think that there's a lot of Republicans who are there, a lot of conservatives who are there, they're very bubbled. They're thinking maybe we double down on it. And you are going to see that the same way we saw, sanctuary cities increase, and LA increasing sanctuary city behavior. You're seeing more leaning into the equity in San Francisco, where they had the school district that was going to pass students who could get a 21% on their exams. If you get 21%, then you pass the next grade. All of that, of course, is pro-chaos, it's anti-excellence. It is pro-equity, but equity means that everyone is equal in outcome. And if you're equal in outcome, then no one's exceptional, no one's an individual. It's all about collectivism and statism and all the isms that hurts human progress. So more at Breitbart.com, and I'm sure I'll bring some of these up tomorrow. But today I want to get into a deep dive in Europe when Oliver comes in. We're talking about the spectacular Polish elections and what that means for the rest of the continent. We at Breitbart do not believe that Europe is beyond saving. We do think Europe can be saved, but a lot of work needs to be done. And there's a lot of big elections coming up in order to make sure that we retain those gains. But this massive comeback from a basically unknown candidate who went to the White House, met with Trump, and brought that populist nationalist sensibility back to Poland, winning in a huge upset. That's big news. And the Ukraine-Russia war is going in the wrong direction. So those details we'll get there with you. But I do want to have John Binder come in to talk about the immigration agenda, and in particular, terrorism, illegal alien terrorism in the United States of America, something that should not be tolerated and deserves more time on the Marlowe Show. And that's what we're going to do first. But before we do, I want to talk about Juvent. Juvent's an amazing sponsor for us, juvent.com/Marlowe. That's JUVENT.com/Marlowe. You get $300 off their micro impact platform, which I use and I think is a terrific product. This is the definition of MAHA. You're not putting anything negative into your body. You're doing things to help your health without having some sort of processed thing, some prescriptions, and we were relying on China or doctor visits. This is stuff that you could do to help yourself. It helps with pain from your bones, your joints, stiffness, declining mobility. Do not accept that that's just part of getting older. I was recommending for a while a bone and joint health risk assessment. You can still get it at juvent.com/Marlowe. And a lot of you are going to have a recommendation that you take action to make yourself healthier and to be more free to have mobility. That's where the Juvent Micro Impact platform comes in. It's patented technology, gentle, targeted signals to your bones and joints, safe, non-invasive, proven to support stronger bones, healthier joints, better movement without drugs or surgery. You do not have to settle for temporary fixes. You can try this product, Juvent, for 6 weeks. If you don't feel the difference, get your money back. For limited time, again, $300 off with code Marlowe at checkout. That's juvent.com/Marlowe, JUVENT.com/Marlowe. You do that now, and you will have a future with less pain, more freedom, especially if you're getting older. If you got someone in your life who's getting older, this could be the product that changes things for them. So check it out. All right, let's get to John Binder. John is with me. John, just by way of segue, because I made you listen to my preamble here, do you have any thoughts on the kind of odd trend with the Pride Month, how some entities are just doubling down, but more pulling back, and it's just sort of schizophrenic thing where the left, they're so lost right now, and they don't really know how to handle it. It seems like some of them are like, we're going for it. We're just going to keep doing Pride, even though people are kind of, we got the picture, and then others are not. They're saying like, well, maybe we got the picture. I mean, gays aren't treated that badly in this country anymore. So the trans stuff is just gone. It's totally adjacent to anything I think that has to do with, basic gay rights. I mean, don't you think?
Yes. I'm not shocked that some companies are pulling back. Like, I think that's a normal reaction to the hysteria we've seen over gay rights in the last 25 years, where it was being treated like an epidemic, which was absurd. So I'm not surprised by that. I'm also equally not surprised by companies doubling down, because that's much like, the media being an extension of the Democrat Party. Huge multinational corporations are in many ways a arm of the Democrat Party. And just like the Democrat Party has doubled down immensely on the most unpopular positions since Trump got reelected, I think a lot of companies are doing that as well. It's barking orders, I kind of have a theory about Pride Month, which is that Pride Month makes the average person homophobic. If we didn't have all of this stuff, we would live in a much more live and let live society, which is the left of the 1970s was the progress that we were supposed to be getting to. And now that's much more of right wingers and conservatives are very much I just want to live. Can you just leave me alone?
Yeah.
Right. And we're so not there anymore. And I mean, we would be there if not for stuff like Pride Month.
Yeah. And this is what I brought this up on the Charlie Kirk show, which is part of why I'm not going to spend too much time on it in case some listeners are coming from over there. I was saying that we mostly don't even want to talk about this stuff with regards to adults. If you really want to break it down, I've got a lot of issues with the trans things. I think that a lot of the autogynephilia, the discussion online is probably pretty accurate, that it probably is a perversion or a fetish for a lot of people to do the trans stuff. But it's mostly I don't really want to talk about it. And I have to talk about it when you bring it into my home via PBS, or you bring it into the schools. And that's the issue, is that they're insisting that the trans have to beat the women at sports, and that Sesame Street's going to do trans. And that's when you're kind of forcing me to deal with it, because I got young kids. And that's you invading my space. So it's not the opposite. I don't really want to invade your space. I want to leave you alone if you're an adult and let you go do your thing. And I might have some objections on a personal level, but I don't really care. I kind of want to let you just go do your life. But you're kind of imposing on my life at this point. And that is something that is relatively new. That was not what we were promised 20 years ago when we were talking about gay rights.
No, the tables were turned 20 years ago. It was very much, I mean, gosh, if you go back to like the days of like Harvey Milk, which are so far gone now, okay?
Yeah.
And these were considered like the most progressive people on the planet. Their entire mantra was like, if you leave us alone, we will leave you alone, right? And if you kind of let us live the way we want to live, it won't have anything to do with you. It won't have any impact on you. We'll live here. You'll live there. You don't have to endorse or be a part of what we want to do. And now it's like endorsements are a requirement of like the gay establishment. You know what I mean? Like you have to, you must. It's like, it really is like a religion to a lot of like leftists in many, many ways. Like leftists have lost so much religion over the last 35, 40 years. And it's why most liberals like are not a part of churches or like any kind of religious organizations. They're very secular, but in a way they're more religious than ever, like because the Pride Month, the LGBTQIA plus alphabet soup community, like this has all replaced the religion of the left. And it's like more zealotry than most fundamentalist religions. Like it's on another level that we've really not seen.
Right. Okay. So let's change gears here, John, because you're focused on a lot of things for us at Breitbart News. You are a terrific fashion reporter with your fashion notes, and which has gotten international renown, even in the New York Times. But the immigration's your main thing for anyone who's unfamiliar with you, which I imagine is few people in the audience, though not many. But I want to get your thoughts on the nature of this attack in Colorado, where you've got an illegal alien who had overstayed a visa and not someone who just come through the open border. And this is something I think for people who are new to the immigration discussion, as you know, I was really 10 years ago when we were just talking about these things. It's shocking to know how many people are visa overstays who are here, and are not just people who came through the border illegally through the southern border, but came here ostensibly through a legal program and just never left. Give me the story of this guy here.
Sure. So this particular accused terrorist is Mohammed Salman, arrived from Egypt in 2022 on a B1 or B2 tourist visa, has an entire family here. So typically in situations like that, the government will assume that someone like this has no plans on leaving when their entire family is here. And it seemed to be the case with him. His whole family was here and he came on a tourist visa, and he overstayed that tourist visa. He never left at the departed date that he was supposed to leave the United States. What's even more appalling in the case that, our immigration system has failed so many Americans over so many decades now, is that the Biden administration gave Mohammed Salman a work permit after his tourist visa had expired. There's literally no reason for this whatsoever. This is something that DHS and Alejandro Mayorkas, would have had to have gone out of their way to give work permits to asylum applicants who have already overstayed their visas and are thus illegal aliens by definition under federal law in the country. And now we see the outcomes of that. This is what happens when federal immigration laws are not enforced. People overstay their visas. We didn't know why they were here to begin with. Now we really don't know why they're here. We don't know where they are in the country. And this isn't like some small part of illegal immigration. Like, I know we talk a lot about the border.
Yeah.
And the border is such a huge issue. But visa overstays, I mean, you were talking about hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens who have overstayed their visas, who are living in the United States, and we don't know why they never left. And a good reminder of this is that people often forget this because we're just, every year that passes, we're further out from this event. But most of the 9/11 hijackers were visa overstays. They came to the United States legally on visas, and many of them actually weren't visa overstays and were on legal visas when they committed the terrorist attacks on 9/11, which is even more horrifying, that our legal immigration system is such a failure that we don't vet people coming from the most dangerous regions of the world, including this man, by the way, Mohammed Solomon, who came from Egypt. Like this Egypt should be a country much like the rest of that region that is so highly scrutinized, that the number of tourist visas for people coming from countries like this that produce such broad acts of terrorism should be extremely limited, and yet it's not.
So one thing that I think is important to highlight for the audience is that you've got a massive percentage of illegal aliens that are here on visa overstays. Do we have a sense of what that is, or is it just so hard to get these numbers? Because again, that's the whole nature of being an illegal alien, is you're hard to keep track of.
No, DHS releases a visa overstay report every single year. The Biden administration tried very hard to cover up the number of visa overstays. Shocking. They were not forthright about this, and had delayed the visa overstay report for many, many months, despite it being required by Congress for DHS to release this report. Under Biden, the visa overstay population in 1 year, the number of illegal aliens that overstayed their visa approached close to 1 million in one single year. That is not to say that's the whole visa overstay population in the US. It's estimated that about half of our illegal population are visa overstays. So if you think that, there's 11 to 22 million illegal aliens, as research has suggested, living in the United States, you can assume, if it's 22 million, there's 10 million visa overstays at any given moment in the US. If it's 11 million, there's 5 to 6 million visa overstays in the US at any given time. But yeah, DHS reports visa overstays every year. I think in 2024, the last one of the last full fiscal years under Biden, it was something like 565,000 visa overstays for that 1 year. So you can see how this builds up. I mean, to be honest, if you want to come here illegally, overstaying a visa is the best way to come. You do not have to pay the cartels. You are admitted by the US government. You have a initial reason to be in the US. And once you overstay your visa, it is extremely difficult for the federal government and all their failures to get you out of the United States.
Yeah. So I think that I want to try to quantify the threat level, because we all know the open border is a big threat. Fentanyl comes through, it drives down American wages, drives up cost of housing, all that bad stuff. How do you quantify the threat of the visa overstays and people overstaying any sort of provision that allows them to be here legally for a time? How do you rank it? Is it comparable to you, or nearly as bad, or is it still not as bad in your view?
Well, I think it's hard to say, because typically illegal alien gotaways are considered, these are the worst of the worst people coming to the United States for ill intent. Because why would you go so far as to pay the cartel to sneak you into the United States? Undeterred by Border Patrol, if you did not have some kind of criminal record or criminal background that would absolutely prevent you from coming to the US, right? So the gotaways at the border are typically considered like, these are the bad guys, right? These are the people coming typically with ill intent, and typically, I mean, in many, many cases, like, that is the case. We see a lot of documented gang members and people with violent criminal records who end up committing crimes in the US, and shocking, they were a gotaway. the problem with the visa overstays is that these are people that are coming on temporary visas that are supposed to be here for an extremely limited time. And they end up sometimes staying in the United States for an indefinite amount of time. Like, if you come here on a tourist visa, right, you're only supposed to be here for like less than a year. If you overstay that visa and you commit some heinous act 10 years later, you have spent the last 9 years under the radar. Like, that is when you talk about threat level, it's about the failure of the federal government to grapple and get a hold on the visa overstay population, I would argue, is the biggest failure of the federal government when it comes to illegal immigration. This is the worst thing that they're the most bad at.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that this was really noteworthy that we have this terror attack that took place, because it just highlights so many of our issues. The widespread nature of the illegal immigration problem, the urgency to fix it, but also the rampant anti-Semitism that takes place on the internet, in our streets, and really throughout the world. It's just I do feel like, John, it's sort of a surreal debate that takes place every day, where based off of Hamas's brutal October 7th invasion of Israel and attack, that now feels like the Jews in Israel are just constantly on defense. And in the meantime, you've got an illegal alien named Muhammad who's torching people in the name of Palestine in the middle of American cities. And I just don't know if it moves people anymore. I feel like people are very locked in on this issue, and I just hope it spurs some sort of a positive change, but you feel like it will.
I'm a bit pessimistic about the federal government making any kind of changes when it comes to enforcing federal law around visa overstays. Yeah. Because it has not been done. And this has been a recurring problem for many, many decades. This is not something new. We've had violent criminals who were visa overstays, people that committed murder and rape of children, and terrorist attacks, like I said, the 9/11 hijackers, who were visa overstays. And yet, here we are. It's 24 years later. We're going through the same thing. The federal government has not acted. Congress has not acted. There is no requirements for DHS and the federal government to deport every single visa overstay every year. And it's going to be a bigger and bigger and bigger problem the worse the world gets. Like, this happened because the world is in like flames right now, in terms of what's going on. And that stuff is just going to keep coming to our doorstep the more we have unchecked illegal immigration.
So I want to talk to you about some of these, some of the crackdowns that Trump is doing in his administration that is different. We've got an instance here where the House Republicans have lost an investigation into the Nashville mayor for obstructing ICE agents. You've written this for us at Breitbart. Tennessee Mayor Freddie O'Connell. This is one of these things that reminds me of the conversation we had at the top, John, with regards to the left trying to decide, should they take a new approach or should they double down? We saw Judge Dugan, very similar to what happened with apparently Jerry Nadler's staffer, where they're just trying to help law enforcement try to avoid enforcing laws, particularly immigration laws. I don't know how it's going to go for them, but they seem pretty committed to this strategy, some people on the Democrat side at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw the insane case of LaMonica McIver, the congresswoman who was on tape assaulting ICE agents, breaking into a federal ICE facility. I mean, like, these are just unprecedented levels of obstructing federal law enforcement that we've not seen. Especially for members of Congress and other elected officials. It does speak to how lost the Democrats are, particularly on the issue of immigration, because it's almost like, they've lost so many elections over this issue at this point, right? One could argue that 2016 was totally lost over the issue of immigration. And I think it's undoubtedly the case that Biden lost, or Kamala lost, over the issue of not only the economy, but immigration, like being if not the top issue, the second top issue for American voters because of what the Biden administration did in importing 8 million illegal migrants to the country. And because they're so lost on we have been losing elections there, it's almost like the doubling down on the unpopular stuff. It's like comfort zone for Democrats. Like they're just getting into their comfort zone of defending illegal immigration because that's what they've known for the last 15 years. Like you just kind of wonder, have any of these Democrats that are huge defenders of illegal immigration to the point that they're obstructing ICE agents, like have any of them read the history of the Democrat Party, which was historically very restrictionist on the issue of immigration solely because labor unions were against immigration because immigration drives down wages. Like it just makes you wonder, like the little knowledge that elected Democrats have of their own party, that they cannot see that, you know, if we just dropped this one issue and we became a restrictionist party again on immigration, like we would actually have a fighting chance in not only every swing state, we would have a fighting chance in former swing states like Ohio and Florida, right? Like it really, you start to wonder, like, do Democrats even know their own history?
No, I don't think so. And I think this is where they're doing, like, they're the war party now too. They just want wars to go on forever. And they always sort of at least treated themselves like the better looking, more aesthetic group of people, and they just ceded that to us. They just like you work out, then you're MAGA now, yeah. And it's assume we're just gonna have the whole culture, and it just I don't think they can help themselves at this point, because Trump has a superpower where he makes it think that everything Trump does is wrong. So thus, if Trump does something or he empowers people who do something, then they will run the opposite direction. So anyway, I hope it continues, because their best bet is to try to moderate somehow. And I don't know if they can. I don't know if they can discipline themselves. But the Big Beautiful Bill is a big conversation right now, John, and we don't have final versions of it. And so this is a sort of a preliminary guess. But what are you thinking in terms of the immigration provisions you've seen? Because it's another one where my guess is you'll say is a lot better than usual, but imperfect. But what is your take?
It's exactly that. It's a lot better than usual. The usual is the bare minimum, hardly anything. So yeah, it's better than bare minimum, hardly anything. There are some good things about the bill, like expansion of detention for ICE. That is a huge win if that stays in the bill. The expansion of ICE agents, like any expansion of ICE as an agency, is critical to Trump's deportation agenda. People are complaining about the number of deportations, and it's like, okay, well, Congress needs to expand ICE. Like, there are only so many ICE agents. There are only so many detention beds. Like, that stuff cannot happen unless Congress funds it more. So that's very important. Expansion of the wall, of course, the border wall, that is incredibly important long term, something that a Democrat president cannot just undo unless they literally take a bulldozer to it, which very well could happen at this point. We could see a Democrat president doing that. All that stuff is important. I think there were things that could have been included in the bill, a higher remittance tax to further prevent illegal immigration by taxing the remittances that illegal aliens send back to their family members in their native countries, and probably mandatory eVerify would be the biggest of all. That would be the requirement that every company nationwide with a certain...
You know what else I like about that one? And the E-Verify, for anyone in the audience who doesn't know, that's when you check the employers to make sure that the employers have to enforce immigration laws, essentially. You know what I like about it? It's tidy. It's not... there's no sloppiness with it, because if the employers are on board, then you don't have to get out the paddy wagons and you don't have to get, start driving family members across the border. It just becomes untenable to have make money here, and thus you leave, you self-deport. And, you let that thing work for a couple of years and it's going to clear out a lot of people.
Absolutely. The number one reason most illegal aliens come to the United States, particularly crossing the border, but also many visa overstays illegally doing this, is for economic reasons. Like you hear that time and time again. Border Patrol agents say people will show up and they say, I'm here, and they think they're claiming asylum by saying, I'm here for economic reasons. Little do they know that is not an asylum claim. That's not a valid asylum claim to be in the US, but that is like the number one reason we hear over and over and over again. So, Democrats screaming about people being like mass persecuted across the world and they're all just trying to come to America. It's just not true. The majority of people are coming because they want to have a job in the U.S. and send money back home.
Good. Yeah, we got to get that in there. John, good flagging, and we stay up to date with everything John reports at Breitbart News. He gives the deep analysis of the data and of the legislation, but also reports the day-to-day illegal alien crime that the media has assiduously avoided. And then now it's too late for a lot of communities, but we're still fighting every single day. Thanks, John.
Thanks,
All right,
Alex.
next up is Oliver Lane. Let's bring him in. All right, new guest to the Alex Marlow Show, but someone who's very familiar to you who consume anything in the Alex Marlow universe of content. It's Oliver Lane, our London bureau chief, who's been with me for a very long time and is not just a terrific reporter, but an amazing broadcaster as well, and a man who has one of the top mustaches I've ever seen, and is someone who's grown a mustache, and a pretty good one. Still cannot compete with Oliver.
I mourn your moustache, Alex. I'm sorry to say.
Thank you for saying that, as I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think that I'm going to need to get back to it soon. And what does your wife think of it? Because you're a happily married man. Like, what does she think of your wife?
Thrilled to say I am a happily married man, and yes, she likes it very much, although she complains sometimes that it tickles. I think what you need to do is to radicalise Mrs. Marlowe into accepting its return.
Yeah, it tickles, but only slightly. Only slightly. That's the line. Just a slight tickle. No, I like it. I'm pro mustache. I remember when I had my mustache, the Dr. Gorka came up to me and he said to me after I'd grown the mustache, "So what is it like for you at the gym now?" Meaning he had assumed I would be getting a lot of gay signaling basically to people, which is not my personal proclivities. Again, happily married, straight guy. Oliver, it is a really big news week in all of Europe, and I wanted to touch on a few issues with you. Ukraine and Russia and that war seems to be going in the wrong direction. The Poland election, which was a terrific surprise, and then the Netherlands, a lot of chaos in the Netherlands. Geert Wilders writes for us quite a bit at Breitbart News, so something we've been tracking for a long time. So I want to get your updates on all these things, but you've been tasked with the Ukraine-Russia beat. I know you share some of it with Francis Martel for us at Breitbart. But this is I'm not liking what's going on in this war. It feels like China has come in to prop up Russia. It no longer feels like Russia or Ukraine have reasonable expectations of what a brokered peace could look like. And now we're seeing both sides, I think, carry out pretty effective bombing campaigns, and it just makes you think this thing is going to go on forever and ever. But before we get to the big picture, I want to start with the more granular detail. What happened with this attack by Ukraine on Russia that people are framing up as Russia's Pearl Harbor? Explain this.
Yes, I find myself coming back time and time again to this meme of Tintin and Captain Haddock, and Captain Haddock's there with his hands around his head going, "Oh, what a week," to which Tintin replies, "But Captain, it's only Tuesday," which is exactly where we are. It's been a hell of a week for news already. And over the weekend, we had this, as they say, as it's already been described, Russia's Pearl Harbor, where Ukraine is really sort of juicing the FPV drone meme to its absolute logical conclusions, apparently by sending whole shipping containers of them, posting them into Russia to addresses very close to Russian strategic air bases, popping the lids on these, otherwise pretty anonymous ISO containers, and out flies the swarms of drones. So it's a bit of a difficult news story in some respects to pass, because there are some big claims. Ukraine saying they've wiped out a third of Russia's entire strategic air force. And by strategic air force, we mean, of course, nuclear bombers. The Russians counterclaiming that, there was a few fires and they may have lost some aircraft, but, nothing to really worry about. As is always the way in this war, the truth is probably somewhere in between. But we do have some really, truly remarkable footage, don't we? Which is just beyond belief. You have this first-person drone footage of them headbutting, essentially, the root stems of Tupolev bombers, which is the backbone of Russia's nuclear deterrent. So it appears to have happened. I think we have to take that on faith. The degree to which this is really going to knock out Russia's strategic air force is yet to be seen. But in terms of the second-order effects, I think that's what's most interesting, because we're looking at, is this going to mean a change to Russian nuclear posture, to their doctrine? Because the whole... trying to put it this way, there was a lot of people carping on social media, the instant take brigade, saying how dumb it is of the Russians to keep their nuclear bombers out in the air, not in hardened bunkers. They're there for anybody to strike if they've got the right munitions, and it seems the Ukrainians do. And then you have the next layer of thinking, which is people going, oh, hang on, we, that is to say the Americans, we do that too. All of our B-52s are out in the air. Why could that be? And of course, you've got to remember, this all goes back to the 80s and the START Treaty and New START, which I think was Obama era, wasn't it? And a big part of this is the ability of both sides, the US and Russia, to be able to verify that what the other says they're doing, they are doing. And a part of that is, and it's not truly codified, I think, in the way these treaties are worded, but it's the effect of both sides keep this equipment, their nuclear bombers, out in the open air, so both sides can look at them using spy satellites or spy planes, and they know that there's not a secret nuclear attack about to be launched, and this is how we keep the peace. So, let's just be perfectly honest, and I'm going to give you my personal take on this. I think what Ukraine achieved over the weekend is incredible. This is like SAS style in the Second World War, sneaking into German airfields in North Africa, planting time bombs, and then running off in jeeps. This is proper boys' own adventure hijinks stuff, and I admire it. Completely dispassionately, not taking one side in the conflict over the other. I don't really fall down that way. But in terms of pure skill, planning, audacity, wow. What an attack. But in terms of those second-order effects, what this is going to mean for Russia's nuclear posture, whether this puts us a step closer to nuclear war, as some have claimed, it's a frightening thought. We'll just have to wait and see.
You start wondering, though, how did they pull it off? Because it feels like, is Ukraine's military this sophisticated, and was Russia this careless? Was there other nations behind this? Was there a sabotage level, maybe someone infiltrated and was able to tip off the Ukrainians? It feels almost impossible when you start really getting into the details. So I'm just trying to figure out what your assessment is, Oliver. And Oliver, you have a military background also, which people should know.
Very small military background. I don't like to play that up too much.
More than I have, so that counts.
Look, so let's compare this to some other operations. I think that's the best way to get maximum information out of this. It is certainly true that in the past, in some of these really spectacular Ukrainian attacks on big Russian units, they have had the direct aid of the United States military. So, for instance, you remember in the very early days of the war, the Ukrainians had this incredible run of luck, if you want to call it that, this incredible run of successes, sinking major Russian combatants like that cruiser in the Black Sea. And this is beyond line of sight. This is well away from the coast. So the question is, you have these drones or these cruise missiles, which they used varyingly in these various attacks. You've got to send them to the right place. You've got to know where your enemy is. And that's quite a sophisticated job to do over the horizon when you can't see where they are. And it did later come out that the US was sort of hand-holding Ukraine, telling the Ukrainian intelligence services where these things were. Now, does that necessarily count in this case? Because I think the briefing we've been getting, obviously because the US intelligence agencies always release this stuff through the same newspapers they basically control, New York Times, etc. The claims is that the US was unaware, the Trump administration hadn't been told this was going to happen, and maybe that's true. We'll see. I think the important thing is ships move, and they always move. And of course, aeroplanes move as well. But in terms of these strategic bombers, they live at a given airbase and are not generally dispersed. And you can see them on Google Earth. So the amount of advanced information, the amount of tracking they require, it's probably not that great. It's probably something they could pull off on their own. And you mentioned, like you asked, just how sophisticated are the Ukrainians? Well, they have the SBU, which is the Ukrainian intelligence division, which does a lot. It does, what we would think of as FBI stuff and CIA stuff. And what was the name for the US wartime equivalent to the CIA when you were fighting the Nazis? That's gone completely out of my mind. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. So
right. Thank you.
So the FSU do all of those things at the same time. So it's internal intelligence, foreign intelligence, and essentially like sabotage operations. So all these incredible drone attacks they do and blowing up Russian railways, it's all through this one office. And that grew out of the KGB. The KGB, of course, which we all remember from the Cold War, and obviously Ukraine became an independent nation in 1991. And what happened to the KGB? Well, it became this. So they have this sort of all-powerful intelligence agency which blows up bridges and blows up ships, and it seems sometimes assassinates people as well. And we've had quite a lot from Ukraine recently. It's clearly very competent and it's clearly very well funded. So can Ukraine do this stuff? Yeah, I can't see why not.
Amazing. And so how does this change the complexion of the war? Because I know that I'm definitely on the side that I just want this thing to end. I had initially people in this audience know that I really put the war at the foot of the Biden administration. I think that they did everything to entice Russia to invade. With their rhetoric, with their personnel that they had chosen. Of course, it was on Russia to invade, so I'm not some sort of a person who doesn't blame Putin at all.
Sure,
and then I credit Zelensky and Ukraine for holding their ground and for convincing the world to fund their war, which I think that, if we had been in the same position, Oliver, if I was leader of Ukraine, I probably would have behaved similarly. But eventually it became clear that he was fleecing us and was trying to get money for Ukrainian oligarchs, and we don't know where it's going. And when he said flat out he doesn't know where $100 billion of the money that was supposed to come from America ended up, that's a signal to me that this thing has got to wind down. We've got to get it. I don't really care how it ends up. It just needs to end. I'm not seeing any evidence that things anything anywhere close to ending at this point.
Yeah, I think we're approaching this from the same sort of position, which is, were we in Zelensky's shoes, how could you have done any differently? And it's very difficult in wartime to put that much effort into accountability, because the one thing that matters is winning. And it's entirely natural. That's the one thing Zelensky wants to do. But in terms of, again, looking at those second-order effects, okay, you want the money and you need the weapons because you need to win, but you also have to keep your allies on side, potentially for a very long time. I don't think anybody, even at the beginning, thought this war was going to be over quickly, particularly after, say, the first month, when it became evident that the Ukrainians were fighting much harder than anybody expected them to, and they had done a fantastic job of keeping the Russians at bay. There's no denying that. So from that point, you're into the long run, aren't you? Because you have to keep them on side.
Right.
And, yeah, as you say, with this accountability issue and not knowing where the money is, perhaps they've not done such a good job.
Yeah. So what do you think? Do you think there's does it even make sense to talk about a path to peace at this point? Because I spent a lot of time on this show going through what I think is necessary for Russia to save face and for Ukraine to feel like they could get out of this thing and without too much more loss of life. And now it just doesn't feel like either side wants any of that. I mean, Ukraine talking about getting territory back that Russia took during the Obama administration, that's not going to happen. And it sounds like Putin wants even more territory than what he's probably going to get, and he doesn't seem that inclined to wrap this thing up. I was frankly surprised by it. Do you feel like things changed, Oliver, or was I just too optimistic a couple of months ago?
Well, thank you for very gently reminding me that I forgot to answer half of your previous question, which you've restated very eloquently. So the problem we have, of course, is that when these negotiations began, even before the two sides started talking to each other, when it was actually the US and Russia doing pre-negotiations, it was very clear that the priors of both sides, their initial positions, were just light years apart. They're essentially asymmetric. They're so unalike. And the hope was, I know for you as well as for I, that there was going to be accommodation between the two sides. And yes, okay, the Ukrainian maximalist position is they get every acre of territory back, and the Russian maximalist position is they get the whole of Ukraine. And maybe there's something reasonable that although we'd all hate it in the West, would actually be better than thousands of people dying every week, certainly thousands of casualties every week. And I hate to say it, but it's been months now, and we've now just had yesterday the second round of in-person talks, the first in-person talks between Russia and Ukraine for years. and it's not looking any better. We've had 2 rounds of talks now, as I say. All we've got out of both of them is prisoner swaps, and that's really important to the people involved, the families of those prisoners, and I don't want to do that down. But these are peace talks, and that has not been achieved. We're no closer to having a leaders' talk. Trump and Erdogan yesterday, again signalled that they wanted to, if required, to do in-person leader talks. So not just the Ukrainian Russians meeting, but actually Putin and actually Zelensky and actually Trump sitting around a table and thrashing it out, which, to be perfectly honest, is what's needed. I mean, Trump's made clear there's probably not going to be any peace that way. And I think that's true. And what the Ukrainians say about there's not much point talking unless Putin's in the room, to give the Ukrainians credit, that's probably true too. Putin isn't delegating a lot of power in the way his government works. If it's not him agreeing to it, it's not a real deal. So my concern, sort of to loop back to the beginning now, is we have these very unrealistic starting positions, and 3 months and 2 sets of talks later, we're in exactly the same place where we started. We had this memorandum, which was circulated by the Russians yesterday, where they want, right away, Crimea is Russian, and then you have the 4 other southeastern Ukrainian regions, which the Russians have a stupid name for. They call it Novorossiysk, which is like a century-old Russian name for the region, and they're saying for peace, Ukraine has to immediately withdraw troops from these areas, and these aren't regions that Russia fully occupies. This is where the fighting's happening. So Russia is calling for Ukraine to immediately surrender territory, and that's just to get a ceasefire before they even start talking about peace. So we're still, therefore, in planet maximalist for the Russians, and the Ukrainians are still saying, as reasonable as I personally think this is, that they want a unconditional ceasefire. So no priors, just everybody puts down their arms so we can talk. That would be great. I'd love it if that happened. But again, that's the Ukrainian maximalist position. We're no closer to peace.
All right, let's change gears here, Oliver, and we'll come back and revisit this down the road. And I talk to Oliver about once a week, at least 2-3 times a month on the Breitbart Fight Club show, Breitbart Confidential, that I do every day. So he's a load of information and enjoyable. So I would check that out. If you're not a Breitbart subscriber, you really are missing out. Let's turn to Poland. It just seems so terrific, Oliver, that we've got an election where it looked like Poland was lurching towards globalism and away from nationalism. And then the conservative candidate goes to the White House, meets with Trump, comes back and surges 20 points in the polls for an upset victory. I mean, it's a total Cinderella story. But I want you to break it down on some new tracks you're up to today for us.
Yeah, so Nawrocki, if I'm pronouncing his name right, these Polish names can be tricky sometimes. As you say, upset victory.
I humiliated myself on the show yesterday. It was pathetic. It was a pathetic effort to try to give the details. So trust me, you will not do the worst job this week on my own show. I promise.
I mean, my wife is Polish. I shouldn't be doubting myself really, but I think it's only natural. But yes, it was so close. It was so close, in fact. The first exit poll said the globalist guy, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name because I can't remember what it is. It just doesn't matter. He's a man of history now, not a man of the future. So he, first exit poll, found it narrowly in favour for him. Then the first count, I think, showed it was narrowly in favour for the globalist. It was only once all of the votes had been counted that it showed it was so narrowly. We're talking like a margin of, I think, 0.3%, one for the populist candidate, which is great news. Okay, it could have been better. It didn't have to be that close, but it's a winner-takes-all system, and it would have applied just as much had the globalist guy won, by 0.1%. That's the way the stakes fall. So it's, as you say, it's a vindication for Trump, because this guy Nawrocki started the race so far behind. He's a political nobody. He'd never held office before. I don't think he'd ever run for election for anything before. He's a professional historian, and the left, all the way through this campaign, was dredging up all sorts of salacious stories about him. Now, just to be perfectly clear, I don't think we can categorically say that any of them are false. I don't think any of them have really been disproved. But the attitude, I think, as has been expressed in the Polish media, of right-wing voters in Poland, or at least conservative voters in Poland, is they essentially don't believe any of these stories because they're so used to being lied to, and they're so used to conservatives being persistently smeared. When you get these like really lurid stories, like the guy who is now the president of Poland, or will be once he's sworn in a couple of days, had solicited prostitutes and had been involved in an underground fighting ring, and was in some sort of dodgy property deal. Now, like I say, we cannot yet absolutely say all this stuff is false, and who knows what will come, and maybe he will be cleared of it all. It's even Stevens at the moment, but the fact is we hear so much of this constantly. Every time somebody pops their head over the parapet, here comes the avalanche of you like being urinated on by Russian prostitutes, or whatever the meal of the day, the plat du jour should happen to be. And credit to the Polish people, they're sick of it and they voted against it.
All right, what do we think that this means, though, for the scope of Europe? If with the new, we're continuing to, I think, slowly make some progress here in terms of the more nationalist, less globalist worldview. Because we've already got Italy, we've got Hungary, we've got Czech Republic. It feels like we're adding countries who are understanding that globalism was not working. And then even in places like the UK, you see Farage is arguably as powerful as ever. Even Keir Starmer, who is, I think, a Marxist at heart, is trying to govern, I think, in a more practical way. So it's how are we looking in Europe? I know it's so secular. It is really watered itself down with it had the best culture on earth, and it just completely has tried everything it can to throw it away. So I'm not saying Europe's salvageable, but it is something that maybe is a bellwether for where we're at in the West at this point in time. But what's your take, Oliver?
So to be perfectly clear, nothing is over till it's over. Europe is salvageable. It's a hell of a long way to go, but never say die. But in terms of what we're seeing now, let's be honest, at best it's green shoots. Okay, brilliant. We have Poland, the main Polish government, because of course this is just the president. This isn't a US-style presidency either. This is a European-style presidency. The real power is with the prime minister and the government. But what's really unusual about the Polish system is the Polish president can veto legislation. So what this does by this conservative winning, because it was a conservative already. The outgoing president had hit his term limit, so this is the replacement. So this continues the status quo in Poland, which is you have a progressive government, a conservative president. They try to pass legislation, and then the president vetoes it, and then they can't do anything. So they're at total stalemate, and they have been for a long time. That continues. So if that's how the Polish people are feeling, we at least then can feel optimistic that come 2027, which is when the next Polish elections will be, they're going to vote Conservative, PAS, whatever it happens to be, for the government as well. Then Poland goes back to being where it was 5 years ago, the most based country in Europe. Now, this also augurs well for Hungary, because the re-election of the Hungarian government under Viktor Orban is coming up, and I'm trying to remember, and it may be 2026, and it's not looking good for Orban. He's been prime minister on and off for this entire century so far, and his polling is not great. And it looks possible, in a race that's really remarkably similar to the one we just had in Poland, the mayor of Budapest, just as the Polish challenger from the globalist wing was the mayor of Warsaw, is his opposition, and he's polling well. But then again, we think about what happened in Poland, started 20 points behind and ended in first place, and maybe Orban will pull that off as well. You mentioned Italy. Meloni, I think, has surprised everybody with how well she's doing.
Talk about Hungary, not to stop you in your tracks, Oliver, but Orban's essentially a dictator, though. So what is I mean, we like him, but he's essentially a dictator. So I'm kind of surprised to think that he could lose, because it's hard for dictators to lose, not impossible. But
he's lost before. His time in power has not been continuous. I'm not going to name dates because I cannot do the history of Hungarian elections off the top of my head.
But do you disagree with my assessment? He's essentially a dictator?
I do. I mean, what are the qualities of a dictator? He is an elected leader who has lost elections in the past.
Sure.
But let's just think about for a second the genesis of that, because he had his time in power in the early 2000s, was voted out and replaced by the left, and the left ran that country so abominably badly that everybody remembers, and everybody in Hungary has voted. I really do mean almost everybody overwhelmingly voted Orban ever since. There was this incredible scandal in Hungary. I think it was like immediately after the 2012 election or something like that. Again, the fact checkers will correct me on that. The left had won, but only just. And the left-wing prime minister of Hungary addressed a internal party meeting, a secret meeting, which he did not know was being recorded, and told his senior colleagues, okay, we lied to the Hungarian people to win this election. What do we do now? How do we now govern? And they'll find out that we've lied. And this recording was leaked to the newspapers, and the government obviously collapsed. There was almost a revolution because that was such an outrageous thing to say, understandably.
Right.
So, with a sort of a democratic history like that, where the left-wing opposition has been, so brutally unmasked, just because Orban is good at winning elections, and frankly, I think it's mostly because of that. I can't agree that he's a dictator.
No, you don't have to. No, it's great, and this is where you're my eyes and ears there, so I appreciate it. So it's the really interesting. So let's come back to that. You were going to mention Italy.
Well, only to say that, as you'd brought it up, Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, I think, is just doing so much better than people had led you to expect, not led you to believe. And we remember, of course, this, really lurid and unified attack on Meloni when she was elected, and every single television station on earth saying exactly the same thing. This is the first time a fascist has led Italy since Mussolini. And it was repeated again and again and again until people very nearly believed it, except then Meloni came into power, and it turns out she's quite pragmatic and reasonable and effective. So it's not doing too badly. She might even win re-election. Who knows?
Really interesting. Okay, so Oliver, the breaking news today is a lot of chaos in the Dutch Parliament. Geert Wilders, who's the prime minister there, is someone who writes for Breitbart frequently and is someone who has really been one of the original champions of nationalism and populism in Europe, and has a historic opportunity to govern there. But it's easier said than done. Set the scene and what's to come over there.
Yeah, so Geert Wilders, bless him, has spent most of his adult life living under 24-hour police protection because he is, what you would call a firebrand, even by the standards of, the stuff we write about every day. He is really an anti-Islamism, anti-Islamification campaigner, and that's been his background and his genesis in the Netherlands, and his ratings in that country, poll ratings, have gone up and up and up with every election that's passed, with every poll that's passed, until in 2023 he came first in the Dutch elections. Now, of course, it's European politics, so coming first doesn't mean you get to rule, because there are so many political parties, not like a two-party system like in the US, where one person wins and then most of the time they get to form a government. In European politics, if you come first, you might have only got 20% of the vote, which is not a great deal. So you have to go into coalition building mode. And Wilders went into coalition with some centre-right parties and a agrarian right-wing party. They spent months writing this coalition agreement of what they were going to do. Everybody got their own little policy areas signed off on. So everybody was satisfied enough to agree to go into government together. One of the real shames about this is nobody could get over themselves enough to actually allow Wilders to be Prime Minister, who under this system, as the leader of the largest party in the government, that's always what happens. But people hate him because we have this tradition in Europe where populists are very naughty and you never let them anywhere near power. And I suppose the way they made themselves feel better about going into government with Wilders is by saying, okay, you can have these government ministries, you're going to lead the government, but you personally, Geert Wilders, will not be allowed near the levers of power. So you'll just be the kingmaker behind the scenes. You won't have a government post. So what's happened this week, or rather over the course of the past week, we had this sort of explosive intervention by Wilders last week where he said, the other parties in the coalition are going against their word. They're trying to change the basic agreement that we had for the coalition, and they are not agreeing to back the border control bills, border control movements, whatever, that I was elected to do. That's why people voted for the Party of Freedom, Geert Wilders' party.
So he's taken a stand that they're not giving him his border security that was essentially his mandate based off of the election, and so he's just putting his foot down.
Precisely. So last week it was, this is what I was elected to do, and you will back me or I will collapse the government. And presumably all of the other parties said privately, he won't dare collapse the government. So they didn't help him, and here we are today. The first thing this morning, Wilders said, very pithy, very, very pithy statement. No border control. They're trying to change the rules. PVV is out. He withdrew all of his MPs, so the government's collapsed. He's withdrawn his ministers from the government. There was a sort of a last-minute dash, I think, by the other parties in government to try to reach out to the left which is the classic thing to do in Europe to keep the populists out, right-left coalition, centre-right, centre-left. But the left, they did terribly. They were destroyed in that election in 2023. So it's in their interest, no doubt they believe, to go back to the polls as soon as possible. So we're now in the Netherlands looking down the barrel of a snap election, which is going to be very exciting indeed.
Unbelievable. Oliver Lane, great information as always. This is what we get day to day at our London bureau at Breitbart News. If you're unfamiliar, thanks, Oliver, and I appreciate you coming by the Marlowe Show, and we'll have you back soon.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, that's today's show. Thanks to producer Harry and producer Marcus for helping us out. And all of you in the audience, tell them 10,000 friends and family members. Thanks for listening.
He's editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a New York Times best-selling author. And on this podcast, he brings deep research, prescient analysis, and world-class guests. He's Alex Marlow. And this is The Alex Marlow Show.